Chapter 10. Back in London. The morning after the Roxburgh ball, Anne lay abed later than usual. It had been a late night, and she'd had a bit of difficulty falling asleep as well. There were so many things to think about. She was still anxious about her father, and while she was beginning to enjoy her season, thanks to the Viscount and his friends' interference, she had some decisions to make about her future. It would be lovely if she had a parent with whom to discuss it all. "Good morning, my lady," Sally sang out cheerily as she threw open the curtains. "I was surprised that you had not yet rung for me. Are you feeling poorly this morning?" "Not in the sense of being ill, no. Thank you for asking, Sally." "In what sense, then?" The kindly maid was observant enough to notice Anne's half-hearted answer. "I had trouble getting to sleep last night, so I slept later than usual and am feeling a little worn around the edges this morning. Nothing to be too worried about." "Oh, dear, my lady, should I shut the drapes and let you go back to sleep?" Sally was contrite. "No, no, Sally. It is high time for me to be up and about. There could be callers in a couple of hours, and I need to be fed and dressed properly if anyone does stop by." Sally handed Anne her cup of chocolate and asked with a coy tone, "Is there anyone in particular you are hoping calls by?" Anne's sigh was both disconsolate and frustrated. "Does it sound foolish to say I cannot answer that question?" Sally frowned at her mistress. "Not foolish, no, but you certainly sound like you need to talk the matter through. I don't know any of the Ton's gentlemen, as it has been ages since her ladyship entertained before you came, but if you're just needing a listening ear, I'd be happy to help." "Thank you, Sally." Anne sipped her chocolate and pondered her problem. "For one thing, I am becoming quite anxious about my father. While he has been less than reliable over the years, especially since my mother passed away, I know he cares about me and would not go off for long without telling me. Despite my aunt telling me that her husband suggested my father should leave, I really don't think he would have just gone off without at least saying goodbye." She paused again while the maid offered sympathetic noises, but had no comment to offer. Anne continued, "The Viscount of Bracondale has been most kind. He has set someone to searching for my father and has proven to be a real friend, much to my surprise. But he assures me he has no interest in gaining a wife at this point in life, and, of course, I have no interest in him as a husband," she insisted. "I am not one of those silly girls who think she can reform a rake into an ideal husband." Anne ignored the flutter in her chest over this thought. "No, I can see why you would say so, my lady. Last night I met a lovely gentleman, a baron from a village only a couple of hours away from my home. He seemed quite pleasant, and even wanted to introduce me to his mother." "That sounds encouraging, my lady." Anne smiled at the maid. "It does sound encouraging, doesn't it? I should be far more excited about it than I am." She sighed again. "Part of me just wants to go home to Rowanwood and forget all about this idea of making an advantageous match. That is a large part of the reason why I wish my father was here, Sally. I wish I could discuss with him if this really is our only option. I do not want to let him down, but it feels like a terrible responsibility. How can I make a choice that will affect the rest of my life?" She could hear that her voice was becoming a little shrill by the end of her speech, and tried to offset the effect by offering another smile to a listening maid. "Well, now, my lady, that is a lot to handle, but there's nothing saying that you have to make your mind up today or even tomorrow, is there?" "No, but there have already been some betrothals announced. It makes me feel like I will miss my chance if I do not make haste." The maid hummed and looked pensive. "I can see that would be trying, but I think you're making this harder for yourself than it needs to be. You still have several weeks before the season is over. Maybe you'll find this baron is perfect for you, or else you will find someone else who is even more so. Or your Viscount will decide that he cannot live without you." The maid chuckled when she saw Anne's cheeks heat over her last words. "That is not going to happen, Sally. But you are quite correct. I really ought not to make this more difficult for myself by thinking about the betrothals. I am already feeling pressured. Thinking about that just makes it worse." Sally was right, Anne thought. While she couldn't help but figure out which gentleman would make a good husband, just talking out her worries helped them seem a little less overwhelming. She really wished there were a lady she could discuss these matters with, someone who would know who she was talking about. No use crying over spilt milk, though, as her mother used to say. Thinking of her mother brought a sheen of tears to her eyes, but she willed them away, another thing that could not be changed. Anne threw back the covers, determined to get the day started and not allow her troubles to turn her into a melancholy mess. "Never mind about my troubles, Sally. What I really need is a good meal. Do you know if the breakfast room is still spread, or should we ring for a tray from the kitchen?" "I don't think your aunt has been down to eat yet either, so everything should still be spread in the breakfast room, my lady. It might not be very warm by the time you get there, though." Anne wrinkled her nose. "Could you help me into a morning gown so that I could hurry down to eat? Then I will change into something more suitable for callers after I have been fed." "Very well, my lady." She had the room to herself. Even the footman who usually presided over the breakfast was elsewhere. Anne could not get quite comfortable in her aunt's house, even if it was becoming more familiar. She longed for home as she ate her breakfast in silence. She made short work of it and was soon heading back upstairs to ready herself for the day. The maid was surprised to see her. "Did you eat, my lady? That was very fast." "The room was empty and quiet, so I was not delayed by anything. Do not worry, I ate plenty." Anne didn't want the servant to be fussing over her, so she quickly changed the subject. "What should I wear today?" Sally grinned. "You said you were expecting callers, is that right, my lady?" "Yes, I do expect that some will be by." Anne found herself flustered by the situation and sighed. "I think the green-sprigged muslin with the cap sleeves would be just the thing, my lady." The maid didn't seem to notice Anne's discomfiture, and followed through on her words, throwing wide open the wardrobe and extracting the mentioned gown. "Oh, yes, that is a lovely choice." Anne thought her reply was weak, but since the servant didn't seem to notice, she didn't bother trying to cover it up. With another small sigh, she stripped out of her morning gown and allowed the maid to button her into the new one. Sally didn't seem to be in any hurry, taking her time with Anne's hair. It actually was a relaxing experience, having her hair done, and Anne allowed her mind to drift as the maid brushed and pinned her locks into place. Absently, Anne reflected that she was relieved that, even though her hair was a nondescript, mousy sort of brown, she was glad to see that it was shiny, healthy-looking, and held the style the maid twisted it into without too much difficulty. Sally was just sliding in the last pin when Anne was jolted out of her reverie by the sound of the knocker on the front door. She searched her reflection critically, but saw that everything was in place. "Thank you, Sally. It looks like we may have finished just in time." She stood from the dressing-table and headed for the door, just as there was a tap on her bedroom door. Sally hurried to answer it. A footman was waiting with the message that Anne had callers waiting. Exchanging a smile with the maid, Anne followed the footman out of the room. There was a steady bustle of activity as callers came and went. Anne's newfound popularity certainly enlivened the day. It was a shame that she didn't enjoy gossip as much as her callers seemed to, but she still managed to enjoy the visitors. The Viscount of Bracondale had arrived just moments before, and was busy exchanging pleasantries with a couple of ladies on the other side of the room, when the Baron was shown into the room with his mother in tow. Anne saw Lord Dunbar's eyebrows rise sardonically, just as she turned to welcome her newest arrivals. "Lady Halstead, how lovely to see you this morning," Anne greeted as she dipped into a curtsy. "Please, have a seat here on the settee. Are you acquainted with everyone else here?" "Of course, my dear." Her reply was proud, but not unkind. The Baroness sat where Anne had indicated, and gazed around the room. Her eyes lit up when Anne's aunt bustled into the room. "Lady Halstead," Lady Sophie greeted. "What a charming surprise to find you here." "I had no idea you were sponsoring a niece for the season, my dear," Lady Halstead explained. When my son mentioned a desire to call by, I was delighted by the thought of catching up with my dear old friend." Anne was pleasantly surprised to see how happy her aunt seemed to be about the callers. She sat down and launched into a cosy visit with her old friend, leaving Anne to entertain the Baron. "I was hoping you could get to know my mother a little bit," the Baron explained as he looked around the room. "I didn't realize you would have so many visitors this morning, nor that she would be so taken with your aunt." He seemed chagrined, so Anne hastened to reassure him. "That is fine, my lord. Do not trouble yourself that I am put out by it. I am happy to see Lady Sophie's delight in seeing her old friend. It is often strange to think of our elders as once being young girls making their own debut, is it not? It is a good reminder, seeing the two of them together like that." "You are quite correct, my lady, and so gracious to take it in your stride." Anne blushed and demurred. "It would be ridiculously churlish to do otherwise, would it not, my lord?" The Baron looked unconvinced, so Anne went on to add, "I think you might be in need of new friends if any one of your acquaintances were to begrudge your mother spending time with an old friend." She decided it was time to turn the subject. With a soft giggle, she asked, her tone teasing, "Has your mother set her sights on any potential new stepfathers for you yet?" His pained but amused expression rewarded her efforts. She was happy to see that he had a sense of humour. "She said she is still observing, determining who is available, before she makes her intentions known to any particular gentleman." Anne managed not to giggle again, but found that she was highly curious. "How long was she married to a previous husband?" "Almost 6 years. My father died just over 7 years ago. The day her mourning for my father ended, she came to me and said she couldn't stand being a widow, and she was going to find herself another husband. I must say it was rather a shock at first. We tend to consider our parents to be fixtures, and it is difficult to see them as separate entities who wish to marry someone other than your other parent. Even though he was dead, at first it felt disloyal. But her second husband was a decent man who made her happy for 6 years. I do not begrudge her that happiness. So I will do what I can to help her find another husband, if that is what she wishes." "I'm sorry you lost your father so young, my lord." He looked at her, surprised. "You must have been much younger than me when you lost your mother." She laughed lightly. "Thus my sympathy, my lord. I know exactly how difficult it is." The Baron sighed and passed his hand through his hair, leaving some strands standing in a manner that she found endearing, revealing a degree of frustration the usually even-tempered nobleman was not wont to show. Feeling a rush of sympathy, Anne reached out and touched his arm gently. "It has to be a little strange to watch your mother courting. I know I would struggle a little with it if my father ever decided to remarry." The Baron put his hand over hers where it lay on his arm, a look of appreciation warming his eyes. They exchanged a smile. Anne's faltered momentarily as she glanced across the room and saw the Viscount watching them with a glower upon his face. Quickly averting her eyes from his intense gaze, she brightened her smile at the Baron, but pulled her hand back from his grasp. The clatter of new arrivals ended the moment between Anne and Lord Seymour, as she went over to welcome Lord Grey and the Earl of Sutton. "My lady." They both greeted her and kissed her hand gallantly, bringing a genuine smile to her face. "The two of you could charm the birds out of the trees. It amazes me that you have not yet been hunted down by all the matchmaking mammas of the ton, as you are surely immensely popular." As if to support her words, the air was punctuated by the giggles of some of the débutantes in the room who had spotted the noblemen at the door. "We have ensured that our charm has boundaries, my lady." The Earl's assurance was suave. "Well, do come in and make yourselves useful by entertaining some of my callers. I am quite certain the ladies have called to see you, not me." "I find that hard to believe, my lady, but we shall do our level best." Lord Grey winked at her as he passed her on the way to greeting others in the room, stopping first to be welcomed by Lady Sophie. The interruption caused the Baron's mother to come to her feet. "Seymour, my boy, it is time we should be on our way," she called to her son. "Sophie, it was a delight to see you, and your lovely niece seems to be a success. I am certain we shall be seeing more of the two of you. We shall wish you a good day." Anne wasn't sure how to respond to the woman's words, so she smiled and curtsied as they took their leave. "One would almost think you had feelings for the lady, the way you are glowering at her suitors," the Earl drawled to Wesley. Wesley made every attempt to brazen it out. "Is that not the point of our presence? To give the impression that we are taken with her, so that others will follow suit and she can garner some offers of marriage." "We did that. It worked. Now she has suitors. Unless you wish to cultivate expectations in the poor woman's mind, you ought to pull back a little, Dunbar. Even I am wondering if you might have actual feelings for her." "Do not be absurd, Sutton. Have I ever given you reason to think I have any desire to become leg-shackled?" "Not up until now," came the swift reply. "Well, I have not all of a sudden changed my thoughts on the subject. I just cannot feel quite settled that the Baron is a good match for her." "Why ever not?" Sebastian demanded. "He's well-to-do, reasonably intelligent, and reputed to be a kind, gentle soul. It's actually rather perfect in my estimation, besides the fact that it would appear that he has a genuine interest in the lady, unlike us." "But his mother! Do you really think Lady Anne ought to be saddled with her as a mother-in-law?" His two friends looked at him as though he had lost his mind. Wesley wondered for a moment if they might be right, but then he shoved the idea impatiently from his mind. He stared at his friends belligerently. Their incredulous looks were tinged with pity, but then they shrugged and laughed. Soon Anne's callers had all trickled out, and her aunt was seeing out the last couple of the ladies. Wesley was glad to see that he and his friends would have her to themselves for a moment. "Did you receive my invitation for an evening at the theatre?" he demanded without preamble. He was gratified to see her look of delight. "We did, yes. Thank you, my lord. Did my aunt not send you an acceptance? I am quite looking forward to it." Wesley nodded. "I haven't read my correspondence yet today, but I am glad the date is acceptable to you." "You are going to an awful lot of trouble for me, my lord. Surely it is no longer necessary, as I seem to have garnered sufficient interest." "We need to see this thing through to completion," he insisted before concluding. "Besides, I gave you my word, and I intend to keep it." She clasped her hands in front of her, looking enchantingly earnest. "Well, I do appreciate it, Lord Dunbar, and I look forward to the evening at the theatre." She turned to the other gentlemen. "Will you be attending as well?" They looked at Wesley, mocking grins on their faces. "We did not yet receive our invitations." Wesley watched closely as Anne blushed and looked away. He wondered what was going on inside her head. Was she embarrassed by her question or gratified by his friend's reply? He dismissed his thoughts. There was a reason he was spending time with the chit, and it did not involve having feelings for her, he reminded himself. "You seem to be pretty cosy with Lord Seymour," he commented, watching the surprise on her face. "There was nothing inappropriate about our association," she protested. "I didn't say there was." His reply was verging on snide. He noticed his friends looking at him dubiously. "It was kind of the three of you to stop by," Anne said, clearly dismissing them, much to Wesley's amusement. The chit was a delight, he thought with a grin. He watched as she did her best to stand firmly gracious, despite her nerves. The Earl was the first to graciously accept being dismissed. "We shall see you this evening, my lady. Save me a dance?" he added with a wink. Sebastian didn't bother saying anything, just bowed over her hand and took his leave. Wesley was the last to go. He recognized the discomfort in her eyes, and decided not to make her any more uncomfortable than she already was. He bowed, making her an elegant leg, and kissed her wrist. He held on to her wrist, knowing he was probably invading her space, but he didn't want his friends to hear what he said. "You looked lovely this afternoon, my dear, and you handled your callers like an experienced matron. You are a success and should be proud of yourself." He had no intention of upsetting her, so he was shocked when her eyes welled with tears and her lip trembled. Thunderstruck, he was swept with the urge to pull her into his arms and comfort her. He resisted the impulse, but did tighten his grip on the hand he was still holding. "My apologies, my lady. I did not wish to upset you." Tears still swam in her eyes as she smiled tremulously at him. "You did not upset me, my lord. It is just that was the nicest compliment anyone has ever given me, and it touched my heart. Thank you for saying such a reassuring thing." The look on her face made Wesley think she was wishing she could do something more than just squeeze his hand, as though she wanted to throw her arms around him. While he would, no doubt, enjoy that, it certainly would not do, so he took a step back from her and finally released her hand. He bowed again, and with a teasing note to his voice he told her, "I, too, shall see you tonight. Don't save just any old dance for me, my dear. I expect you to save me a waltz." This must have been just the right note, as she took it for a joke and offered him a watery-sounding chuckle. "Good day, my lord, and thank you for coming." Wesley strode from the room, restraining himself from looking back to see if she were watching him. He could feel her gaze, but resisted the urge to wave. He would see her again within a few hours. His friends were waiting for him on the front steps of Lady Sophie's house. "What took you so long?" grumbled Sebastian. "Have you no idea how thirsty that has made me?" Wesley chuckled. "Come along, then. The club shall quickly make short work of your thirst." "But seriously, Dunbar, what did take you so long?" the Earl asked quietly. "You weren't giving Lady Anne any trouble, were you? She has been handling the attention we have garnered for her quite graciously, and I think we should be advising her, not admonishing her. In fact, she might not even require our advice. I know we started this venture with serious misgivings about the chit, but I think she is a nice young lady who was sadly misguided before we came along. You need to offer her your support, not the rough edge of your tongue." Wesley was surprised, but gratified by his friend's words. "You are absolutely correct, Sutton. And no, I was not ringing a peal over her. I was just taking a moment to say a few words to her, as I did not get to talk to her, despite being there for much longer than was perfectly acceptable. It seems as though we have done our job too well, and she is too popular. Some of her callers cannot even get to exchange words with her." "I hardly think anyone is feeling slighted when they visit her," the Earl pointed out reasonably. "From what I could see, she was a gracious hostess, and all her guests were enjoying themselves." The Viscount could not explain what he had meant, so with impatience he blurted, "Never mind about that. Let us head to the club and assuage Sebastian's thirst. I could certainly join him in tossing back a glass or two." The other two men exchanged amused glances, but did not argue with their friend. Before long, they were ensconced in their usual seats, being served their favourite brandy. After a couple of glasses, Wesley turned to his friends, no longer able to keep his concerns to himself. "I think I've found her father," he said without preamble. "Whose father?" Sebastian was puzzled. "Lady Anne," Wesley answered, keeping his voice low and glancing around to ensure they were not being overheard. The Earl laughed. "I think you are turning into a fribble, Dunbar. It would appear you can no longer hold your liquor." Wesley scowled at his friend. "I can hold my brandy just fine, but that doesn't mean I know what to tell her ladyship about her father." His two friends eyed him for a moment, waiting to see if he would elaborate. "I did not realize Lord Austen was missing," the Earl stated carefully. Wesley shrugged. "There has not been a hue and cry about it, but her ladyship is concerned about his whereabouts." "And this prompted you to mount a search?" the Earl prompted, his eyebrows elevated. "Don't look at me like that, Sutton. We agreed the chit is our responsibility. She was worried, so I said I would look into it. Nothing in it to make you look like that." "If you say so," Sutton replied with an amused grin. "So, what did you find out?" Sebastian demanded. "Not sure if I should tell you two before discussing it with her ladyship." "Then why did you even bring it up?" Sebastian seemed disgusted. "All right, children, don't get yourselves tied in a bunch," Sutton soothed, restraining his laughter. "Finish your drinks. It's high time we got on our way. If we are to meet up with our lady, we ought to hie ourselves home and change our togs."